So as I mentioned a moment ago, we're really excited about the three panelists that I have on the phone with me today. And together they bring decades of agronomy and precision ag experience. And so I'll take a moment to introduce them now. So our panel today is Dr. Chad Godsey, owner of Godsey Precision Ag based in eastern Colorado, and Dave Schreider, president of Integrated Ag based in west central Ohio, and also Dale Cowan, the senior agronomist at Agris and Wanstead Co-ops based in southwest Ontario. And Dave will actually be speaking at the InfoAg conference in St. Louis later this month on creating management zones for variable seeding. So we're looking forward to hearing more from him in a few weeks as well. So the image you see here shows the different geographies that our panelists cover. And I just wanted to show this to highlight the different regions from Colorado to the north side of Lake Erie, because each speaker brings a slightly different agronomic perspective based on these various geographies, and I'm excited to hear more from them in a moment. So we asked you a couple questions when you registered for the webcast, and I want to begin with the first question we asked, which was, how many of your growers are currently utilizing variable seeding technology? And I want to take just a second here to show you the results of that question. So as you can see, it looks like for almost all of you, or all but 6% of you, less than half of your growers are currently using variable seeding technology. And this is in line with what we've been hearing from industry professionals like yourselves. We've been hearing more and more people are just getting started with variable rate seeding, and this really sparked why we chose our topic today, because it's a growing precision ag practice. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chad, and he's going to kick off our panel discussion here.
All right, thank you, Ben. I just want to get the presentation started. Just make a few general comments and maybe provide some of the basic background and some of the things to consider, especially in the first year or two of variable rate planning. And then I'll let Dale and Dave go into a lot more greater detail. The first thing to consider is that local agronomy trumps everything, and we'll discuss that quite a bit this morning. You'll hear it throughout the presentation, and also you'll notice the difference between maybe some of my thoughts and how I approach variable rate seeding, and then also compare to how Dale and Dave do further east. But you've got to take into account local agronomy, that local climate, when we're talking about corn maturities, so things like that. Local agronomy trumps all. The second thing is, you'll notice throughout the presentation the different types of data that we use to create quality seeding zones, and that can vary a lot from region to region. A lot of this goes back to soil type and climate, but there is no one size fits all when it comes to variable rate seeding. You've got to decide what is best for your region. The third comment on this slide that I want to make is that really provide or establish a support team, I guess, if you will, that understands your local agronomy and also has experience using GIS tools. And sometimes you may need multiple people to fill these roles. And sometimes you can find one person that has that agronomic skills and the GIS tools. But to be successful, both those are very, very important. The next thing I wanted to mention is that, especially in year one, it's very important to develop clear-cut goals for what you want to accomplish. Is your goal simply to save seed costs? And perhaps it's to increase yield. Now, in a perfect world, we do both of these, but sit down with your producers beforehand and develop those, write those goals down. This is just a quick, very quick economic analysis from one of the fields, or actually a combination of a couple of the fields that we've had variable rate seeding in for 4 or 5 years now. And the original goal of this producer was simply to save money. He historically had been what I guess I would say in the middle as far as seeding rate goes. He planted an average rate, wasn't too aggressive or wasn't too conservative. But you can see over a 4 or 5 year period here, we've saved $1.75 an acre over what his historic uniform rate had been. So you know the seed saving cost has been pretty minimal. Granted, it's been enough to pay for his seeding prescriptions over that time frame, but not what he was hoping for. And this is typically what we see, you know, with seed savings. It can be anywhere from $0 to $5 in my experience in my area. The second thing is, you know, when we look at increase in yield or potential increase in yield, and at least in my area, that's where we see our biggest benefit of variable rate seeding is that potential increase in yield. We deal with a lot of sand hills, so we get a big increase in yield or potential increase in yield from reducing the population on those areas, and then by pushing population in the better parts of our field in our area. So this is the same set of fields. You know, over the long term, over the 4 or 5 years, we've been able to increase revenue or bushels almost 9,000. And you can see our seed savings is pretty nominal over that time frame. Just some other considerations that I wanted to mention, and you'll hear Dale and Dave talk about these too in their portions. But it's very important to work with seed companies on hybrid population. They are the ones that have the best idea of population response to their hybrids. Unfortunately, as like most of you know, the hybrids change. You know, sometimes they're only around 2 or 3 years, and by the time they go away, we finally have a decent handle on population response. So you do need to lean on them to determine, or you know, at least as a starting point, to see if a hybrid, you know, has a potential to respond to pushing that population. Second comment is cover the basics before moving on to variable rate seeding or variable rate planting. In a lot of cases, I've seen fertility issues, say pH, phosphorus, things like that, not be taken care of. You're really defeating the purpose of variable rate seeding, and you really won't see as big a benefit from it if you don't take care of those basic things first. Final comment is, you know, set reasonable expectations from variable rate seeding and do it early. So, you know, before you get started with a producer or client, set those expectations. Once again, economics may or may not be a lot of potential in seed savings. And then, you know, we know in year one we're not going to nail those management zones perfectly. There's always room for improvement. So keep those things in mind and set those expectations up front.
Hey Chad, I'm going to pause you for a second here because a question just came in that's relevant to a point you were just touching on. And the question was, what is a reasonable expectation for variable rate seeding in year one? So how do you set those expectations, or what do you expect?
Okay, excellent question. The way I look at that, and it really is on a producer by producer basis and even a field by field basis. But you know, so depending on how aggressive they have been on uniform seeding rates in the past, there may be a chance for, you know, a few dollars per acre seed savings. But then I would look at how much variability there is in that field to kind of determine on, you know, what the expectations are as far as increasing yield. In a lot of cases, I feel like we have success if we, you know, have I guess followed through, delineate management zones, and then followed through with actually getting the seed variable rate planted. So it's those small things in year one. And and really expectations in year one, if you set out a good, either strip trial or check plots, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and being able to evaluate those at the end of the year, that's a good expectation, or a good outcome is being able to quantify how much you've improved things, or if you have improved things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks for pausing there and answering that, Chad. Yeah, and also thanks for the general comments on the variable seeding, Chad. I know it's something that you're working with more and more on your growers' fields each year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dale, who's going to start by discussing some sources of infield variability.
Well, thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel and to share our experience with you this morning. So this is all about variability. This is the opportunity in the field and to do better. The whole premise behind precision ag is to understand and manage this variability. So there's basically three main sources we deal with: the natural, which is your field landscape that you bought or inherited, the slopes and topography and soil type changes you can't do much about that impact on yield, and all those man-made activities that tend to occur in straight lines, especially with RTK technology. It's pretty easy to figure out where you've been. And of course the random and the weather, and if you're like everybody else in the Midwest, we're pretty wet here too. So we got all those things that interact individually and together to determine how the crop is going to grow and what the yield outcome is going to be. But anymore, the fourth source of variability that we maybe haven't appreciated in the past is the plant-to-plant variability out in the field. And when we it's easy to do, take 1/1000th of an acre at harvest time, pull all the cobs out, lay them out in order, and as you can see, they're not all the same size, and lots of variance from cob to cob, and a lot of that is is environment and planter operation. So just for fun, if you take that and extrapolate, well, if I had 32,000 each one of those, what's the yield range if I had those 32,000 each of those cob size? And you can see on average it's 175 bushels, but the potential is to be as high as 217. So there's quite a spread, about 125 bushels spread on cob size alone. So you look at an opportunity of something above zero for increasing. So in this case, if this is how you want to look at it, it's about a 42 bushel opportunity if we can get all the cobs the same size. So this is what's really driving the farmer interest in more precision planter equipment, placement and down pressure and all those sorts of things. So it's getting the population right. I find in most fields there's three populations: the one that gets planted, the one that comes up, and the one you harvest. And of course our goal is to get them to as consistent as we can before we go out and deliberately start to change our plant population. So this is one of the first steps that we're working with is just getting good performance at the beginning. And so this just shows you the opportunity here of better plant-to-plant management. So management zones is where we want to get to. First understand the scope of the variability, what opportunities that are there to create those management zones. You're looking for consistent size and shape year over year. You're looking at consistent yield performances, those areas that are always high yielding and low yielding, and field average. And some years there are small acres that's variable. And then you're looking at those attributes in there that can be measured and managed. And then the sources for a lot of this zone establishment are multi-years of yield maps, some topography, soil data, of course. We're looking at some drone imagery right now. And of course, we can't underestimate the farmer input. Who knows their fields better than a farmer that travels over them several times a season over several years. And there's other layers of information that should develop and support a consistent development of management zones. And if your zone changes year over year in size and shape and yield, then really it's not a management zone. So you have to work hard at getting these set up and confirmed over time. And so establishing that, most GIS software packages that's in the industry do a pretty good job of containing multi-year yield analysis tools for yield normalization or merging of layers. And I often find simple is the best place to start, and we look at a lot of multiple year yield maps and identify simply the areas that are above average, average and below average. And sometimes you find a few small acres that are variable that you can play with one way or the other, but they tend not to be that big of an area. And then you can decide on how you want to position population rates in a zone or use management blocks within a zone to test different rates. And then next step is to work with your seed suppliers, understand what are the specific hybrid population dynamics that we want to understand about the hybrids we're going to choose. And it's pretty important to have a good handle on that and work with your seed company.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. I'm going to pause again for a minute here to take a look at the second question the attendees answered when registering. We asked you, what is your biggest challenge in achieving your objectives for variable seeding? And since you were just touching on management zone creation, I thought it'd be a good time to check out those results. So it looks like in general, the responses varied across the different challenges from collecting the planting data to evaluating the effectiveness of a recommendation at the end of the year. We see that many challenges exist for successfully achieving your variable rate seeding goals. And so, sorry to interrupt you there, Dale, but now that we've seen some of the common challenges that the attendees face with variable seeding, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well, that's a good survey result because I've lived all of those and still do. So it certainly is not a straightforward, easy path to follow, but it's one I think that's worth pursuing. So carrying on with the hybrid performance data, working with our local, in this case, Decal, but any seed company will have this data. And just look at your relative maturity zones of 80 to 80, 90 or over 90 day, and looking at the yield ranges, how they split up the different yield ranges and between high yielding areas, being over 210 bushel in the 90 day relative maturities, and the low yielding areas less than 160. So figuring out where you're operating, what hybrid maturity rating you're using, and where your yield zones are showing, where you multiple your yield analysis showing where your high yield areas are, you start to put together a strategy around how you want to place hybrids in these management zones. So quickly, I'm just going to highlight, this is DeKalb 4982. This is a population curve, yield against population, and you see a curve sloping upward to the right saying as I increase my population, my yield goes up, and then it plateaus off. This is a 99-day corn, and you can see that somewhere around, looks like all the way up to 39,000 plants per acre, we looked like we were getting some yield response, but you notice that curve gets pretty flat at the top, so the amount of yield versus the seed cost starts to really go away on you in a hurry. So you have to start looking at what is the seed cost relative to the yield here, and what's the optimum population. So here you can see that even at 40,000 plants an acre, there was a pretty good yield bump. But when you look at the economics, 36,000 plants per acre at the upper end of the range is kind of where your optimum seeding rate was based on economics, all the way down to 30,000 in a mid or average yield range on a field, and then on low yielding areas, well, they're just suggesting that you just don't go below 30. So that's one hybrid dynamic that you're looking at for that early maturing. Then we move on to something that's a little longer day. This is a 107-day hybrid here, and it looks like it just really doesn't end. You get a slight leveling off around 39,000 plants an acre again. So it looks like it's a pretty strong performer on population. And then when you look at the economics again, you're coming in at around 37,000 is kind of the maximum rate in high yield areas, and down to 33,000 is kind of the minimum range that they would be recommending for a population. And I think I have one more here that's even longer day corn. It's 111, and you see that again, this one you've got some other interesting here. You got more stock breakage as you get above 34,000, and then the population seems to peak around 35 or 36. And once again, you look at the economic ranges of seeding rates, and they're coming in pretty tight at 33.9 to 33.1. So there's three different hybrids or three different population dynamics that you need to understand. Is that what are the variable rate opportunities on pushing some of these hybrids so you still have the desired economic traits and performance. So quickly, just to expand on Chad's economics, up here, our price per unit of seed is roughly $275 a bag. So seed cost per 1,000 seeds is just over $340. So if you increase your population by 5,000, your cost per acre goes up 17, and corn at $4, you're looking for 4.3 bushels to break even on that extra seed cost. And conversely, in those areas where you're dropping it and saving 17 bucks an acre, you certainly want to preserve the yield and pocket all that, and hopefully maybe in some cases there's actually a yield increase. So those are the ranges of economics that you're looking at when you're playing around with your seeding rates, and what the payback you need to have when you start messing around with your populations.
Yeah, Dale, we actually just had another question come in that's relevant to this economic slide that you're talking about here. And the question was, when considering increasing a plant population, do you look to break even on the extra seed cost, or do you have a minimum return in mind to justify that extra investment?
Well, I think if you're getting to your break even and your yields are going up, that's kind of the minimum that you want. Yeah, you can play on that scales to just get to that tipping point and even maximize even more. I think when you're in your first year when you're doing this, you really don't know where that is. So what you try to do is to understand that if I increase my seeding cost by $17 an acre, I need to have the 4.3 bushels. That's kind of what I'm looking for. And so it really, in the first year, you're really kind of flying a little bit blind as you go here. But certainly break even is not the end of the world if that's where you end up.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for pausing there and answer that question. So, oh, there you go. Turn it back over to you.
Okay, good. Thanks, Ben. So part of the process is simply is a map that we've run through. Up in our neck of the woods here, we are in corn, soy, wheat rotation, and so sometimes if you're looking for 3 years of corn yield data, it takes 9 years to get that. We have been shorting that a little bit by normalizing corn and soybean yields together, as long as we get some consistency out of the management zones. Or we look at other layers like topography and some drone imagery to confirm what the yields are telling us. But this is how we do 3 years of corn here. So we clearly see some areas that are above average and of course the average in the field, and then some areas that are below. They tend to be the headland and the tough areas around the edge of the field is where we tend to find the troubled areas. And this field looks more consistent to the east, but it's not tiled there, so it's not the highest yielding area in the field. And the west side has got tiles, a little more variable, but the yields are higher there. So sitting down with a farmer and showing him this map, he just said, you nailed it. That's exactly how he sees the field. And so you had some confidence from him that he was confirming what the data was telling us. And so we went ahead with this farm and we started to place our hybrid, and we started to play around with some populations, and then inside those population zones we started to challenge some of those curves. So if we were in an area where it said we put 34,000, then we would go down to 30 and up to maybe 38 within that same zone with these management blocks. And I like the management block idea. It's not that you can't do strips, but when you do a lot of strips and you start getting big yield differences, if you want to normalize yield in subsequent years, you start to really skew the yield patterns in the field. So these small blocks minimize that skewing and certainly facilitate being able to pull the hybrid performance through by yield when you get the yield map in the fall using some of the GIS tools. So this is just the basis of a map for loading into the monitor on the corn planter, and then have it trigger the rates as it's going down the field. So this is kind of some of the process that we've been going through, is position first the management zone, then the population, then challenge that population with these management blocks inside. And of course, you know, the technology is great. You get the as-applied map back, and the reason I'm showing you this is understanding the technology you're using and working with the farmer, and you get some first-year mishaps. So what's missing on this map is my management blocks never got planted, because this particular monitor at this juncture was not picking up polygons that weren't tied to a field boundary. So it just shows you some of the pitfalls you can run into. Now subsequently it was fixed in next field, so this is the only field that I have this way, but these are some of the things you need to be aware of. Understand the planter, monitor, and the equipment, and the manufacturer very quickly gave a firmware update on this, so it's working now. But just shows you again the beauty of the wireless technology and the cloud computing. As I had this map back an hour after the farmer finished planting the field, so we were able to diagnose the problem and carry forward pretty quick and get things right for the next field. So again, the as-applied map just confirms the targeted map that went out. And then of course, once you have the data back, all the layers come in. If he's recording down pressure is what's highlighted here. You can see that, you know, parts of the field need a little more pressure than others, and this is some of the diagnostics tools that you like to have when you are troubleshooting the yield map in the fall, to be able to look at some of these other layers and figure out what may or may not have gone on in the field. So again, once you're into this technology, it's using all the layers of information to analyze at the end of the season has been invaluable. And after all the effort and investment, take time to scout. As I said earlier, there's 3 populations in a field: the one you plant, the one that comes up, and the one you harvest. So you can see here, just advanced one more, so there's some missing plants, some plants that come 2 or 3 days later that end up being a weed. You know, not being critical of anyone's plant or equipment, but just being realistic that stuff happens. This is the learning opportunities. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is done on the computer in the office, but this is the stuff you need to confirm out in the field when you're done. So, you know, lots of other learning opportunities emerge. There's lots of other things going on in the field. So if you want to understand your population dynamics, figure out what else is impacting on that population out in the field, that requires some scouting. So just bringing that to the forefront. So in summary, having all the data, or at least all the relevant data organized in the GIS allows the analysis tools to be used. There's lots of tools. For example, yield by population can be pulled through on some of these software GIS programs, so pretty easy to analyze at the end. Certainly we've been using Ben's services, XS Inc. to help us analyze some of our data with the multiple layers. And I was really highly recommend that if you're going to do variable rate seeding, just do that. You know, do one variable at a time, and so if it's a seeding rate variable, don't be throwing variable rate nitrogen on top and micronutrient passes and all those sorts of things. Try and keep it as simple as possible the first year and just look at your seeding rates, but make sure, as Chad said, make sure all your other inputs are non-limiting and that nitrogen is sufficient, and P and K are looked after, and pH, all those good things. So, but I like the small management blocks. It affords the opportunity to analyze within the zone without skewing the yield in larger areas. I see a lot of yield maps, the 100-acre farms that are test plots every other round. Makes it really hard to pull through any kind of meaningful information if you're going to establish management zones later on. So those verification of those zones and population rates always compared to the normal farm practice. And when you're done at the end of the season, it's just as important to calculate that return on investment. Just how well did you do? Did you nail the management zones? Do they need to be tweaked? And did you optimize the population? Did you go high enough? Were you too high? Those are the things that you're going to learn in your first year. So take an organized approach and following through with a logical sequence, and make sure you capture the data to do the analysis at the end of the year.
That's great points, Dave, or Dale, sorry. And thanks for sharing the background on how you get started and improving upon this variable rate seeding practices. And now we're going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to start by diving deeper into refining those seeding zones and really getting at optimizing those rates.
Well, thank you. Good morning to everybody. I think the first thing I want to do is set the groundwork just a bit. When it's been mentioned earlier, Chad mentioned about all agronomy is local. And some of the things I'm going to show you that we're doing is what we're doing in our geography in west central Ohio. I think some of the practices and principles can be effective and useful across the Corn Belt, but the layers of data that may be required in Ohio may be completely different layers of data as you move west or north. So just understand that as we look at these things, it's not that these specific layers are critical. It's that we need to put together layers of data to optimize seeding rates. One of the things that we're doing that we found to be very important is that we want to use data that has temporal stability, and we want to be able to use data that is measurable. There's a place for normalized data, and there's a place for real data, and honestly what we try to do is we try to put both together when possible. We use a lot of intense soil sampling. We prefer the half-acre grids. The chart you see in front of you is just a comparative to the reliability of half-acre versus doing zone sampling and so forth. And for us, in variable rate seeding, we rely heavily on the organic matter and CEC pieces of data that come out of our soil sampling, and we need that data to be very accurate. What we do is we found that no one single layer of data or information is always going to give you the exact and perfect picture. There can be times when, for example, a normalized yield map can do a really good job of delineating management zones, but there are lots of times where they don't. So what we've done is we've come up with a simple process, and we call it the Common Production Unit, CPU. You'll hear me talk about this again. And all we're trying to do is we're trying to combine multiple layers of data that are stable. They don't really change over time. And by combining those together, we effectively identify the areas in the field that are highly productive, the areas in the field that are average, and the areas of the field that tend to be lower producing. And from that, we can take that CPU layer, which combines all these other layers, and do a really nice job of doing things like variable rate seeding, variable rate nitrogen, and so forth. The layers that we use, go ahead and switch the slide, I'm sorry. The layers that we use, we try to capture all we can. In this particular field, we had 4 different layers of data that we combined. Once again, organic matter in Ohio is very critical for us. We have a large variation in organic matter. We can go anywhere from 0.5% to 30%. Probably the normal range is from 1% to 5%. And that's a huge driver for us in determining what seeding rate. Normalized yield, with the emphasis on normalized. Dale, I think, mentioned this earlier about using GIS systems to normalize yield. You can't just use yield data, it needs to be normalized. By doing that, you can combine multiple crops. It also does a much better job of taking out some of the fuzz that you get in yield data. For us in Ohio, slope is critical. If you've got RTK elevation data, in Ohio, we've got some pretty good LiDAR data that we can use, and from that we can create slope maps. And the side slopes for us are a really big indicator in productivity. And we know that our side slopes, especially steep side slopes, never yield as well as the flats on the top or the bottom. And then the CEC is another area that we use quite a lot, and it's also a reflection of productivity. The higher clay content soils versus lower clay content soils tend to be an indication of yield. So we score all of those, put them together, and what you see is that map in the center, which is our base layer that we now use to drive variable rate seeding. Wanted to show you a couple of comparatives here. On the right-hand side, what we're comparing is we're comparing our CPU map we've generated from all these layers and comparing those to a soil survey map, soil type map. And I don't know how well you can see it, but the dark lines are an indication of the soil types. And then from green to red is what we've generated out using to create our CPU map. And if you look closely, you can see that there is a general trend to where the soil types do follow what our CPU map follows. But when you look closely, you start to see the detail that's generated out of a CPU map that is not generated out of a soil survey. We see this a lot where to do the level of precision we're trying to do with variable rate seeding, if there's one big mistake that's made, in my opinion, it's when we start to follow soil surveys, because they're just not accurate enough in a lot of cases to do a really good job of identifying where those populations need to be. On the left-hand side, we also took an NDVI image of this field. This was later in the growing season, and it did a really nice job of identifying the areas that are productive and the areas that are not productive. And once again, we overlaid the soil survey, and once again, you can see that the areas that are outlined by soil type just do not match up all the time and are just not accurate enough to do a great job. What I'm really trying to say is what happens if you don't have a good set of base data to create management zones. You can be doing exactly the opposite of what you want. You can be putting high populations in areas that can't handle high populations, and you can be putting low populations in areas that can handle more and can respond yield-wise. The other piece in this image is we see this all the time is you'll see this blue line kind of dissecting the field in half. This is a county. This field falls in 2 different counties. So when you start to look at soil surveys, it's going to show, even though it's the same soil type, it will show it as two different names because of a county split. It can be managed, but it's also a hassle because you can be fooled into thinking that if you aren't familiar with dealing with these things, that it's a different name, therefore it's a different soil type. How do you assign the population? And these are things from a GIS standpoint and that can create challenges, especially for somebody that doesn't deal with this on a regular basis. Here we've got a couple more images. On the right-hand side is simply a yield map, and on the left-hand side is a CPU map where we use normalized yields, OM, slope, and CEC. All I'm trying to show here is that by creating these temporally stable management zones using the CPU, they do model very closely to what we see from a yield standpoint, and that's really what we're looking for. And because of that, that's a really good indication that this is how we want to also establish our variable rate seeding recommendations. Aerial imagery is something that we are looking at pretty seriously for lots of different reasons, and I'm really excited about some of the things we're going to be able to do with remote sensing. I really believe remote sensing we're just on the cutting edge of some really great stuff that we can do with it. But as is the case with most new technologies, we also have to be careful about what we do. This is an image of the exact same field taken at two different times. It was taken this growing season. And if we were trying to take these two images and create a variable rate seeding recommendation from it, we would have all kinds of problems. It just so happens this particular field has two different varieties. It was a split planter, so you can see the green and yellow. You can also see on the right-hand side, on the top image, that is corn after corn, and the rest of the field is corn after soybeans. So that makes a different color, and could, if you didn't know better, you might set up two different management zones there. And then there's the blue diagonal streak going through the center of it. It's actually a waterway. It's really not a waterway. What happened is that area got worked. Therefore, it set the image off to a different color. And so all these things, you have to understand these things, and to set up a variable rate prescription just using this can be a bit challenging unless you have more local information about it. Here's another image. On the top right is thermal imagery, and then on the bottom left is our multi-layer CPU map. And I surely don't want to send a message that imagery cannot be used to establish variable rate seeding. It can. You just have to make sure you've got the right image, the right set of information, and you have some local agronomy that can help you establish these. In this top thermal image, this was taken earlier in the growing season, and it was measuring the heat coming off the ground. So the dark soil was reflecting more heat than the light soil. And from this image, we could do a really, really nice job. We could establish that the darker green would be is actually the lighter soil, so we could establish those as zones, and then the yellows and reds would be another zone. And because in this particular case I have a lot of knowledge of this field, that really matches up well and really do a nice job. The other key for us is we look at we've got a good CPU map, and those zones match up really well there too. So we've got two different pieces of information, both saying the same thing, which really lends itself to say, okay, this is something we really could do a nice job of establishing some zones to do a very accurate job of doing variable rate seeding. Dale referenced this earlier about different hybrids and their response to population. my point in all this is simply that these are really nice curves that you see that most seed companies put out. It's not that they're incorrect, it's not that at all, but the reality of life is the response to population is not a pretty curve like that. There's really, there's a lot more noise in the numbers than that, and I think it's important that we all understand that as we move into the variable rate seeding piece on your operation. Here's some data that was put together, a study was put together by Bob Nielsen out of Purdue, and I think it's really interesting. The first point is as you look at those two charts, on the left-hand side are plots. These were on-farm studies that they did, and every point is a yield point based on population, and the same is true on the right, but they separated them by good condition versus poor condition. Point one is you see that there is not a nice curve as far as yield and population, that the data is somewhat scattered. Point two, which I think is the critical point to take out of this, is what they did find is that if you've got good growing conditions, that in general the corn will respond to higher populations, and in poorer conditions, the corn, the optimum population there was about 24,000. So you had 34,000 in good conditions, 24,000 in poor conditions. And really, when we set up management zones, that's really all we're trying to do is we're trying to establish from past history, we're trying to figure out where in our fields do we have the most likely chance that we're going to have really good growing conditions versus really poor growing conditions. Essentially good soil versus poor. And so this data really substantiates the fact that yes, there is a reason to do this. I will say in our growing area, for the optimum range, we'll probably drop something closer to 36,000, and in our poor conditions, poor soils, we'll put about 28,000 plants per acre on. And the reason being is that this is all based on about a 5 to 10% stand loss just from planting to emergence. And what we found is that poor growing conditions, it's more likely to lose more than that in poor soils. In good soils, it's a little less, but we still want to kind of insure ourselves against those years where we get that 15 or maybe even 20% stand reduction at emergence. So when it's all said and done, we've taken a whole bunch of information and we've crunched it all together to create what we call our CPU map. And there's a lot of stuff going into that. But the next step in the process is really pretty simple. Once we've done all that, once we've got all that information together, it really becomes very simple to turn that into a variable rate seeding prescription. And I feel like that's critical because when it's all said and done, as a farmer, what they really want to be able to do is they want to be able to simplistically be able to plant corn or soybeans and do it the right way. So all we do is we take those zones and we match them up, and we match them up to the population. We'll work with the grower to adjust those populations based on hybrid, based on their farming operation. We set the maps up, and the way they get the VR prescription, they load them into their tractor for the planter, and if all goes well, we'll have everything loaded in, and they'll be able to plant their whole farming operation without any hiccups. The part that sometimes we tend to forget about is the need to constantly be critically evaluating, analyzing what we're doing. And there's some really good tools out here today that can help us do this pretty simplistically. AgVeritas has got a nice tool to look at, okay, let's challenge ourselves as to what are the right populations for our management zones. Do we have our management zones set right? Are we matching our populations right to our hybrid? And I think it's the post-mortem that we should do every year is critical. And if we do that, as we go through this process, we can only get better and better at matching the population and hybrid to our management zones.
Yeah, I think that end-of-year ROI evaluation is a really important and often overlooked step. So thanks for touching on that, Dave, and also just for sharing your insights in general. And I'm looking at the time here, and I want to be sensitive to all the attendees' time. So this is the conclusion of our panel discussion. So I also want to give a big thanks to Dale and Chad as well for their participation. For those of you who have a couple minutes to stick around, I'm going to do a really quick demonstration of the precision yield analysis software AgVeritas that Dave just mentioned. And we're actually releasing a new variable rate analysis enhancement this summer. And I just want to take a moment to walk through an example that showcases that feature. And you can see on your screen that there's contact information for Chad. So if you're interested in following up with him after the webcast, feel free to reach out to him. And also, whenever you sign off today's webcast, a quick survey will pop up where you can request to be contacted by any of the panelists or find out more information about their organizations. So if you have a moment, we'd appreciate filling out that survey at the end as well. Now, for those of you who are interested in looking at AgVeritas, the tool is designed to especially help with some of that spatial in-field variability that Dale discussed earlier, to give a more accurate assessment of your variable rate applications. And so this first slide that I pulled up now just kind of gives you a high-level overview of AgVeritas. And what it is it's a web-based yield analysis tool. So it's available out in the field, on your tablet, or anywhere there's internet connection. And the way that it works is it uses a spatial statistics process to take all those data layers that you have for a field, whether it's seeding rate or hybrid, in-field variability like soil types or elevation, nutrient levels, all of that data that you have for a field that you think might have some kind of impact on the yield, we take all those factors and analyze them at the same time to determine which of them are impacting your yield more or less. So you get that kind of diagnostic information about what's really driving your yield on your field. And then ultimately what everybody wants to know is a certain management choice or investment decision, such as investing in a higher seeding rate, is that profitable, and if so, where? So really getting to the core of what is that optimum rate. And so I'll take just a moment to walk through in a quick example here. And what we're looking at was, this is actually on one of Chad's growers' fields. And Chad had set up 5 management zones that you can see on the left based off of a normalized yield. And you can see that he variable rated the seeding through those different zones. And I have the rate in the red text there next to each zone. And then what he did was he did a strip of different seeding rate checks to see if that rate could have been pushed higher to make the producer some more money, or maybe use a slightly lower rate and cut down on some of those costs. And so anyway, that's the trial setup that we're looking at. And the real question is, what is the optimal seeding rate in these management zones? And so this is the result of that analysis through our new variable rate analysis enhancement. And what you're seeing on the right, and you see the key below it, is the map of that field. And each of those different colors is a different seeding rate that was the optimal rate for that season. And so just to do a quick check here, comparing the optimal rates based on those check blocks and all the other in-field variability compared to what was originally recommended. It looks like, Chad, it's one of those pat yourself on the back prescriptions there, within 1,000 seeds for all the zones there. So anyway, again, at the end of the webcast, when you sign off, you have the option to request if you want any more information about AgVeritas, and we'd love to discuss it with any of you and show you more. And so that concludes our AgVeritas demonstration. And thank you to everybody for sticking around today. We hope that you found the information shared to be valuable. And a big thanks again to Chad, Dale, and Dave for sharing your insights and spending some time with us this morning. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your day.